reading right now focuses on authenticity. And I'd like to take a few minutes here to just talk a little bit about what that means. Charles Lindholm, the author of the book, argues that authenticity is a characteristically modern concern. We've talked a lot about the extent to which culture constructs reality for people. Your culture tells you what the world is like, what to expect from it, and how you should act when you're in it. Your culture tells you, this is how men act, this is how women act, this is how babies act. And as you grow up, you absorb all this, and it shapes how you act yourself. Now, as you grow up, you ask the question, what should I do with my life? Well, there may be a few answers to that question, but probably not too many. Given the person that my culture says I am and the things that my culture associates with that kind of person, most of the choices I can make are pretty limited and straightforward. If I come from a farming family in rural Denmark in the 18th century, for example, I could become a farmer myself. I might also become a miller, or a blacksmith, or possibly even a priest. But I'm not going to become a ballet dancer, or a university professor, or a doctor, or a professional basketball player, or any number of thousands of other professions that exist in the world. And that's actually comforting. I know what I am, I know what to do, I know what to expect in my life, because my culture draws a reality around me that describes all that. Now, that's a classic human experience. And in the kinds of places that humans have lived for most of the last 100,000 years, that's been a very effective way to do things. The culture tells you what reality is, and as far as you're concerned, that's what reality is. But in the modern world, that changes. In the modern world, you're suddenly in touch with other cultures, deeply in touch. And those cultures present very different ideas about what reality is. Not just cultures in other parts of the world, but cultures in your own country. Instead of living your whole life in Ellenburg, New York, you can travel and experience the culture of New York City, or Chicago, or New Orleans, or if you really want to go crazy, Washington, D.C. That kind of contact is exhilarating, it's enlarging. It makes you realize that there's more to the world than what you knew, that there are other ways of living and other ways of being. That's tremendously exciting. But it leaves you with a problem. If other cultures have other kinds of reality, then what's really real? How do you choose among all these different ideas of what to see and do and be when you're living your own life? We are evolved to base our actions on what we know is real, a knowledge that comes from the culture around us. But if our culture is suddenly only one of many cultures, and if each of those cultures draws reality differently, then where do we find our own understanding of the real? If our own culture seems suddenly arbitrary, how do we figure out what the world really is? We need an answer to that. We have to find an answer because the question isn't just about what's out there in the world, but also what's inside of us. In a world where you don't know what anything is, how do you know what you are yourself? What is the foundation of yourself when there doesn't seem to be a firm foundation for anything? Lindholm argues that modernity involves a new kind of psychological problem, a deep uncertainty about the self that can be very disturbing for people. If you don't feel like you really know who you are, you don't have a basis on which to act. You're paralyzed, you're adrift, you're lost. Much like the situation we were talking about with revitalization movements, the situation where people find themselves without a reliable map to tell them how the world fits together. In a situation like that, you need to find something that's deeply true. You need to find something that doesn't seem to be just a figment of your culture's imagination. You need to find something that's rooted in the very fabric of reality. Put another way, you need something authentic. You need something that feels like it's objectively real, like it's not a fake or an imitation or a cultural construct, but irrefutably and universally true. If you could find that, you could build your world around it. You could build a self around it. You could overcome the psychological crisis that modernity has loaded onto you. And as a result, Lindholm says, the quest for authenticity, the quest to find something that's really real, is a basic feature of societies all around the modern world. Now here's the bad part. The unpleasant secret that anthropology has for you. It doesn't exist. Authentic culture isn't really there. Everything is created by culture, and everything could be done another way. You're not going to find anything in the human world that isn't contingent and changeable and transient. But that doesn't stop people from wanting it, and they put a lot of effort in trying to find it. Now, before we close for today, I just wanted to mention two options for finding something that's authentic. That is, suppose you want to find something that's authentic. You wanted to know, for example, if a painting is a real Rembrandt or if it's a fake. Well, there are two ways that you could go about establishing it. Let's take the painting as an example. Here's a painting here. Is this really a Rembrandt? Was it painted by Rembrandt? Now, how do you find that out? One option would be to focus on the origin of the painting, an approach that Lindholm calls historical or genealogical. We could say that something is real because we can find a trail of historical documents that irrefutably ties this painting to Rembrandt. This process is called provenance, and it's an important part of the curatorial process for art. So, say, for example, the painting has something written on the back, and say that we found a document from 1850 that says that a painting with this written on the back was on display in a particular gallery. And let's say that we can prove that this painting was exhibited at that gallery. And let's say, too, that there's a passage in one of Rembrandt's letters that refers to him having written this on the back of a painting. Well, if all of that were true, you could be pretty sure that this is a Rembrandt. That's one way you could do it. The other approach would be to focus on the content of the painting, something that Lindholm calls the use of correspondence or identity. We could look at the painting and see if it felt like a Rembrandt. I don't know if you've ever seen a Rembrandt in person. They have some down at the Met in New York City, and there are also a bunch of good ones in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. If you are ever in either place, take the time to go see them. They are amazing paintings. They're technically good, of course. They look like real people, but that's not what makes Rembrandt special. What's distinctive is the way they make you feel. When you look at one, and the person inside is looking back at you, you feel like you are in their presence. You have the same sense you do when you're with a real person, that there is another soul there in the room with you, and you can sense who they are and what they're like. It's extraordinary. And very few painters in history have been able to do it. Almost none of them have been able to do it like Rembrandt. Now, some people say, well, that's how you know it's a Rembrandt. You might actually be able to fake all those documents, but no one could fake the feel of a Rembrandt. Certainly they couldn't fake it to an expert who's had a lot of experience working with Rembrandt's paintings. Now, it's worth noting that neither of these approaches is strictly reliable. Documents can be forged, and paintings can be forged, and it's entirely possible that either a genealogical or a correspondence case for authenticity could be wrong. But these two basic approaches to establishing authenticity are found in all areas where people look for it, not just in art, but in music, in ethnic identity, in national culture, in cooking and religion, in everything where people in the modern world look to find truth, where they look to find ultimate reality, where they look to find that thing which may not exist, but which they desperately want to be there. They will turn to these methods to convince themselves.